On today's episode of the Locked On Texans podcast, do you have faith Nick Caserio can work around salary cap constraints in order to build this roster to make it competitive? We hear from DeMeco, we hear from Stroud. Sarge,
do you believe?
You are Locked On Texans, your daily podcast on the Houston Texans. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Battle Red Nation, welcome into today's episode. We are your credentialed media members and Texans football analysts. I'm John Hickman. That's Brian Big Sars Bearfield. On today's episode, we'll be looking at the most underrated change of need for the Houston Texans. The talk of the town, offensive line coach. But what are we overlooking? And we'll dive into that today. That conversation, CJ Stroud's faith in Nick Caserio to build the roster, and DeMeco Ryan's offseason plans to improve the roster. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code all lowercase LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. And also, thank you for making us your first listen of the day, for being a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Big Sarge.
Greetings and salutations, Mr. Hickman.
Extremely excited to talk Texans with you today. Before we dive into DeMeco Ryan's offseason plans to improve this roster, let's hear from DeMeco Ryan himself.
Yeah, I'll take some time to just reflect on the season. Right now, so many things that are going on as we finish up the season. A lot of conversations to be had, a lot of decisions to be made, and once that happens over the next month or so, I'll take that time for myself to reflect and recharge.
Coach Joe Mixon expressed confidence in Nick Caserio's ability to build a roster. Said he's got things cooked up, the fireworks are on the way. How do you guys approach that offseason of wanting to not just come back with the same team, wanting to always be upgrading and looking for the best talent you can get into the roster?
As me and Nick approach the offseason, doesn't change. That's every year we're looking to improve our roster as best as we can to put out a winning team.
Well, John, you heard it there first from Houston Texans head coach DeMeco Ryan and what his plans and what Nick Caserio's plans are to build for the future. And I know that he didn't give you. So the one thing that I like about DeMeco, right? DeMeco gives you just enough to keep you guessing and wondering, but also answering the question. He's not going to give away anything that has to do with what they're going to do with the roster as far as the cuts they're going to make, with the additions they're going to make, what they're looking for in the draft. He's just saying, me and Nick Caserio are going to work together to do what we always do. Get the best Houston Texans roster that there is. And John, one of the things that's going to have to happen is there's going to be a lot of restructuring, of these contracts in order to be able to have that big splash that they had this past offseason and bring in some of these free agents or even make some trades if Nick is willing to give up on some of those trades. What do you have? 6 draft picks, John?
In 2025, 6 picks, yes.
6 picks in 2025. He may have to do some maneuvering of some of the picks this year in 2025 and some future picks. It just depends on who's out there and who's available that will help this team. And I know later on in the show, we're going to talk about the most underrated change of need. But the one thing that I like, and the one thing that I like and the Houston Texans fans should trust in is DeMeco Ryans and Nick Caserio. Those are two guys who love football. I mean, I know they're going to take a couple of days out take a couple of days to be with their families, and then they're going to get right back into it, John. The sting of losing to the Kansas City Chiefs, the way that they lost to the Kansas City Chiefs, like that still hurts. Like you can still see the hurt on DeMeco's face from losing that game. After the game, John, when he came to the press conference, in his face, you could just see that he felt like his team was the better team, and they just need to get over the hump. A lot of execution, a lot of things that should have been executed wasn't executed, and you're going to get that when you have a younger team. And what a lot that wasn't talked about, John, was the Houston Texans have veterans, but they also have a lot of older veterans. Yes. And so maybe they can get some of those middle of the road veterans in here to help get them over the hump, to help blend in with this young team. A lot of third and fourth year players coming into the season next year. But I have the utmost faith that a general manager like Nick and a head coach like DeMeco, especially DeMeco one, that you've seen him be able to build up players and build up their confidence to want to go out there and do whatever it is that needs to be done to help the team.
Let me look at this contract situation for the Houston Texans, salary cap situation for the Houston Texans. Cap hit for 2025, Laremy Tunsil, 28.8. Danielle Hunter, 23.7. Titus Howard, 23 million. Nico Collins, you don't worry about that. 18 million. He deserves it and probably more. Shaq Mason, nearly $15 million. Dalton Schultz, $14 million. So I look at this team extremely top heavy, right? Some of those contracts you absolutely are expecting for them to come in and have a conversation about, hey, we need to reconstruct this contract in order to give us a little bit of leeway, because as of right now, the Houston Texans are not operating with a lot of money in salary cap.
Yeah,
that's just the facts. And in order for Houston to make that splash, and I do think you can make two splashes, free agency and the draft, but in order for Houston to do that, they're going to need wiggle room. They're going to need additional funds to operate with in free agency. And for the receiver position, you may look at that and say, well, we can go younger and get a stud receiver in the draft. Or we can look around the league and maybe say there's a couple of vets that we would like to bring in to boost up our floor so our drop-off isn't as high. Take into account, and we'll talk about this from CJ Stroud's perspective. He wants to get Stefon Diggs back. I've said what I said on that. But you'll be without Tank Dare for a while. So I think it's interesting to see, first and foremost, okay, let's take a break, as he said. But for Nick and DeMeco Ryans to say, first, what do we need to subtract to get better?
Yeah.
I think that's going to be the first conversation that needs to be had. All week we've talked about Dalton Schultz, right?
Yep.
Like, that's probably 1-1A. The effort that he brought in that last game, the most important game of the season, I don't think DeMeco Ryans is okay with that.
Yeah.
Not if you're not able to perform, it's when your effort isn't there or lack thereof. And so, okay, how do we look to maybe have a conversation with both Titus and Laremy Tunsil, who could combine to make over nearly $50 million next year, to maybe get some of that back so we can improve in other ways, even if we don't move on from them, even if they are on the Houston Texans roster for next year, we need to be able to improve. And you guys, leaders or lack thereof, however people feel, from Laremy and Titus, we need for y'all to help us out in that area. So I think that they're going to come back from their break and say, listen, we got guys that we both brought in. CJ, Will, they're not going anywhere. Derek Stingley, who just got on the all-pro list, first-time all-pro, not going anywhere. Nico just wrapped him up for last year, not going anywhere. Joe Mixon, not going anywhere. He's on a bargain deal, considering what we saw from Saquon and Derrick Henry, and Joe Mixon would have been right there if it wasn't for the injuries and better offensive line play. Not going anywhere. Our guys are our guys, but who's not bought in?
Yeah.
Who's not going to, execute in the areas we need them to execute?
Well, John, hold on. And with this being said too, because I mean, you also got to take into account, there's no possible way you can bring back Jimmy Ward. Like, you're gonna have to find some way. It's time. Jimmy has done his part here. He's helped DeMeco build some structure. But John, there's also the Texans are going to lose players based off the fact that the Texans gave them an opportunity and a chance. You remember what was the running back that was Cam Akers? Remember Cam Akers came here, got a chance. The Houston Texans brought him in, gave him an opportunity, and then next thing you know, he's playing with the Minnesota Vikings and getting a lot of playing time. A lot of those guys that are here, and I know that it won't be a lot as far as the cap is concerned, but a lot of those guys have played their way into signing with other teams.
That makes sense. Tim Settle, I'm scared to lose him.
Oh, he ain't going away. They had him for 2 years.
Well, he's on a 2-year deal. Great.
Yeah,
That's
Tim
awesome.
Settle's not going nowhere. Yeah.
I look at a Shaq Mason. Hey, thank you for your services. 32 years old, making nearly $15 million, taking up 5.3% of our cap hit next year. They got to find a way to move on from it to get off that contract. If not the entire 14, maybe a third of that, right? But he can't come back. So Houston right now, I think, is in a very interesting situation. And this may be the time where we see how can Nick Caserio really maneuver some things to make it work. Coming into the league, his first time with the NFL, not the NFL, but coming into the Texas organization before we move on, it was a little bit easier for him because the expectations were low. And then each year they got better and better and better. Then boom, you hit on Will Anderson, CJ Stroud. And then the following year you have a good draft. And then you also pair that with a good free agency because you finally have the money. Now his back is against the wall in the sense of I need to have a good draft, and I also need to figure out how to maximize players on a roster, players we need to move on from. And oh, by the way, Joe Mixon talked about this. Players that may want to come to Houston, how can I make that work?
Yep. And John, before we move on, just one question I have to ask you, and maybe we could talk about this a couple of shows down the line. Derek Stingley is up for an extension, right?
Yes, he is.
Kenyon Green.
Let's
talk about that.
That's a conversation we'll have later on in today or later on in next week. We got time this offseason. We'll talk Texans, and that's a great conversation to have.
Yeah.
Also, Locked On Texan fans, I want to let you guys know that, your team may have not made it to the Super Bowl. Yeah, you may have been a little bit mad about it. Maybe angry. Maybe you need to release some of that stress. Maybe you need to see a therapist. And therapy is a game changer. It can help manage your stress, improve sleep, communicate more effectively. But finding the right therapist and fitting sessions into a busy schedule can be challenging. That's where Talkspace comes in. You're looking at two guys, Sarge and myself, huge advocates of therapy, right? And with Talkspace, they are the leading virtual therapy provider, making getting the help you need easier, more accessible, and more affordable. With Talkspace, signing up is simple. You can match with a licensed therapist who fits your needs, usually within 48 hours. It's convenient. You can have sessions from the comfort of your own home and even message your therapist between appointments. Plus, Talkspace is covered by many insurance plans, and for most insured members, there's a $0 copay. It's never been easier to prioritize your mental health. As listeners of this podcast, you'll get $80 off your first month with Talkspace when you go to Talkspace.com/LockedOnNFL and enter promo code SPACE80 to match with a licensed therapist today. Go to Talkspace.com/LockedOnNFL and enter promo code SPACE80 to get $80 off your first month with Talkspace. Again, promo code LockedOnNFL. Promo code SPACE80 when you visit Talkspace.com/LockedOnNFL. Welcome back in, Locked On Texas listeners and viewers. Also had an opportunity during the exit interviews and press conference to hear from CJ Stroud and his faith in Nick Caserio to build the roster. This is what he had to say.
And how his confidence, his ability to build a roster. How do you think about that in terms of the context of, like he's mentioned, having those conversations, putting your input in?
Yeah.
And he also made a pitch for Stefon Diggs. He'd love to have Stefon back. Your thoughts on Steph?
Man, y'all know me. That's my boy. Like, I would love to have Steph back. And, man, I think we was just getting started. Like, you see, he was having so much fun. And we and him were starting to build a rapport. And, and really, he's a person where, he loves with his, he wears his, I don't know, what's the saying? You put your heart on your sleeve? Yeah, that one. He wears his heart on his sleeve and in everything that he does. And I appreciate it because in a world of perfectness, in a world of not being weak, in a world of everything being, perfect, like he's one to tell you, like he's not. And I'm right there with him. Like, I am not perfect. I am not the one to be up here to tell you how great I am. No, it's only by the grace and mercy of God that I am ever in this position, or and he'll tell you the same. So to be around somebody like that who holds those same type of values, is amazing. And for him to be vulnerable in public, and things like that, like, it helps people that, are going through it. We're all going through something, man. Like, I really hope people like can sit there and really sit down and realize we are all going through things, and it don't make it right just because a person is on a pedestal to like get on them, or like to bash that person for whatever they do. Like, of course, yeah, like you have to be accountable for your actions, but you should definitely, we have to learn to give each other grace, and that's something that he taught me is like, man, giving grace ain't easy, but it's definitely necessary, because the way you judge, the way God will judge you, and that's just what I believe in. And he's somebody who I would love to do all this whole thing back with. So yeah.
Everybody in that locker room is fans of Stefon Diggs. He has some off the field stuff going on with him and his brother. Hadn't really talked about that and don't necessarily need to, but CJ Stroud's faith in Nick and this whole franchise to build this roster. Obviously, Stefon Diggs is a name that the Houston Texans the players in their locker room want back, Sarge. Right now, there would be a $16.6 million cap hit if he doesn't come back. They would have to take that on in dead cap money. I didn't know that prior to yesterday. And so I guess would it make more sense to bring Stefon Diggs back or not? But overall, I think a question that I want to ask you is, how much should CJ Stroud's input matter in terms of building this offensive side of the ball?
His input is going to matter a lot. They're going to ask him. They're going to talk to him. They're going to see what he wants and see what he needs. And you can tell that the team has a lot of faith in CJ being able to bring in, a Joe Mixon and at the time, extending Dalton Schultz and seeing, what they have in Nico Collins, giving Nico Collins his extension, before the season started. And so he is one of those guys who, John, I want to be honest with you. And I know that this is a name that we don't mention, here in the city of Houston, but, the former supposedly franchise quarterback, number 4, Deshaun Watson. They're two totally different people, John. They're two totally different entities. And to be fair, I mean, Deshaun had a different coach and a different general manager than what CJ has right now. But you can just see that the franchise is more of CJ's than it ever was of Deshaun Watson. And, that's why when you take a look at the way that things transpired with DeAndre Hopkins, getting traded, and he had to find out through, Sports Center. They had to find out through ESPN. And then, when they went through the hiring of a new coach, excuse me, he had to find out from ESPN as well. And so I don't think that that's going to happen with CJ. So I preface all that to say that here's a young man that they believe in. Here's a young man that they have faith in. Here's a young man that they know gives his all. I don't know if you remember this or not, John, but before the season started, I had put this out because I had a one-on-one with DeMeco Ryans, and I asked him who was the biggest football junkie, and he said CJ. And he said because CJ will be texting the group different types of plays and things that he's seen and ways to get better. It'd be 11, 12 o'clock at night. Bobby Slowick said the same thing. He said sometimes he had to text CJ and say, go to bed. And so there's a lot of faith in CJ Stroud. His input is definitely going to be needed. His input is definitely going to be heard. And let me just say this real quickly, John. When we talk about Stefon Diggs, there was a lot. Stefon Diggs and Joe Mixon were two players that, were supposedly had a lot of baggage coming from the places that they came from. And I wasn't in any of those locker rooms. I wasn't in the Bengals locker room with Mixon, and I wasn't in the Vikings or the Bills locker room with Stefon Diggs. And so I don't know what happened there. I don't know what transpired there. I can't speak for that. But all I can tell you is this, is that they've been nothing but the best as far as role models is being concerned. And they have been the veterans that the Houston Texans and young Houston Texans core needs, especially with CJ. CJ has a lot of respect for Joe Mixon, and he has even more respect for Stefon Diggs. And I don't mean that in a negative way. What I mean is that, Stefon Diggs, and it's crazy because they both sit next to CJ. It's Joe Mixon, Stefon Diggs, Tank Dell. All to CJ's left. And to his right is the guy that protects him on his blind side in Laramie Tunsil. They set that thing up the right way so that CJ could also have not only those veterans, but voices that he can bounce things off of. So bringing back a Stefon Diggs, who we talked about, helped Tank Dell, helped Nico become better, helped John Mechie, helped Hutchinson, still in their ear, telling them, showing them how to be a good wide receiver. And even on the defensive side of the ball, John, after one practice, we got a chance, after one training camp practice, we're talking to Jalen Petrie, who's the last one to go. And when he got through talking at the podium, Stefon Diggs was waiting on him so they can go over different type of route concepts on how he can get better, picking Jalen Petrie's mind and Jalen Petrie picking his mind. So, John, they definitely need to bring back, to me, in my opinion, bring back a Stefon Diggs.
The case is being made, honestly. I'm one of those guys. I'm okay with saying I'm wrong or that's my opinion. And if the team goes the opposite way, I'm not going to crucify them. That's not my job. What I will say is, even if they decide to bring back Stefon Diggs, I just gave you guys the numbers, $16.6 million is going to be hard to move on and pay for a player that ain't here in Houston. I think Houston is in an intriguing situation for this. Why they're in an intriguing spot right now for this upcoming season, free agency altogether, is because the insurance of Tank Dell, he won't be there. I truly don't believe he should even play this year coming up. I want to see him 100% healthy. Don't want to risk it. There are some guys out there in free agency this year that I think Houston could benefit from having here in town. Tutu Atwell, Diami Brown, Elijah Moore, Rondale Moore. Those are four guys that I think the Houston Texans could bring in to their organization, not all together, of course, but of those four that would give this team the separators outside or inside, guys that can play outside, inside. And I also have faith that this team would upgrade at the wide receiver position. I think we can agree on that's a position of need for Houston moving forward.
Yeah, for sure. I believe that as well.
And so bringing Diggs back, age 32, ACL tear, he'll be coming back off of that. I don't know what the numbers look like for post-30 receivers bouncing back from a ACL tear.
He's a vibranium.
ACL injuries are not the same as 10 or 15 years ago. The medicine and the whole science of it is different. But regardless if they bring Stefon Diggs back or not, this is why it's important for the Houston Texans to create that additional cap space, because there are capable wide receivers out there that have been productive around the league. CJ Stroud highlighted the Rams and Matthew Stafford. Tutu Atwell got a lot of experience playing with that quarterback and that tempo and that style that he wants to play with here in Houston. So there's guys out there that I think the Houston Texans could benefit from bringing into this building. Before we close out today's episode, the most underrated change of need for the Houston Texans. This is a conversation that many people need to have within themselves. Can't wait to talk about it. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. That's $300 to keep the action going. The FanDuel app is easy to navigate, and the variety of bets keep the game exciting. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. No waiting around for your winnings, whether you're betting on your favorite team or just looking to add something extra to the excitement that you're already boiling with for this NFL postseason. FanDuel has got you covered. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $300 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season more unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL.
Welcome back, Locked On Texans viewers and listeners. John, the most underrated change of need for the Houston Texans, and when we say underrated, we're saying we look at positions and we know that the Houston Texans need to upgrade at the offensive line position. We know that the Houston Texans need to upgrade at the wide receiver position. But John, I do believe that there's one position that the Houston Texans definitely need to take a look at coming up in this year's draft, especially, and that's at the running back position, because Joe Mixon was out for 3 games against the Vikings, the Jags, and the Bills this year after that illegal hip drop tackle against the Chicago Bears in week 2. Yes, I said that because it was an illegal hip drop tackle. And it put Joe Mixon out for 3 games. And now with Joe Mixon being out, you're looking at some production. You need production from Dameon Pierce, who was also injured and out. And now you're left with Dare Ugubawale. Now you're looking at, you still have JJ Taylor, you have Jawar Jordan. Like, there are some backups that they have, but I do believe that at the running back 2 position, the Houston Texans need to explore more of that. John, are we on the same page with that?
No, absolutely. When you look at those games where Joe Mixon wasn't in the game, or even for the Houston Texans altogether, 31st in success rate, 3rd in stuff rate, right? And when Joe Mixon was not on the field, obviously you saw the difference in their rushing attack. That's paired with the fact that Joe Mixon is such a magician as a running back. Those small holes are just enough for him to get that crease and create a play downfield. Did a very good job of creating explosive runs. But for the Houston Texans, I like Dameon Pierce. I think there's an opportunity there for them to upgrade. And you got some running backs coming out in this year's draft. I don't think the Houston Texans should sign a free agent running back.
Yeah, I don't think so either.
That wouldn't be smart. Yeah. I think this is the perfect opportunity for Houston to find their future back for when year 3 of Joe Mixon comes around, and maybe at times year 2, you're giving Joe Mixon a break.
Yeah.
You want Joe Mixon, who will be in the league. This will be his 10th season coming up. Mm-hmm. He's been in the league for a while. Very successful running back. But you also want to make sure that he's fresh enough for when the playoffs get here, for when the games that truly matter get here. And when you look around the NFL, some of the better offenses in the NFL, they got multiple guys that can run the ball and do different things.
Yep.
Like, even when we looked at Lamar Jackson and the Buffalo Bills, but the Baltimore Ravens and Derrick Henry, Justice Hill is a good running back. Now, he's no Derrick Henry. He's no Joe Mixon, of course, but you got to have guys you can trust to put out on that field. And I look at this running back draft class. I look at a guy like Caleb Johnson out of Iowa, 1,500 yards rushing the ball, 6.4 yards per carry, over 1,000 yards after contact, had 191 zone run attempts. So if you're looking at the Houston Texans and thinking to yourself, well, Bobby's coming back, you're looking at a running back that will fit perfectly into the system that he wants to implement. Also, 66 missed tackles. Taj Brooks out of Texas Tech, 171 zone run attempts, 872 yards after the contact, 58 missed tackles, and he's also somewhat of an effective pass catcher out the backfield when he gets his opportunity. So I think this is a great time for Houston to go younger. And, I think this was on Wednesday's show. We talked about how the Houston Texans has a great foundation of young players. This is how you extend your window, by drafting younger guys that can come in and execute in your system the way you want them to. And you got some backs in this draft. The Houston Texans should absolutely come away from this draft with a young running back.
John, I also feel like this too. I feel like if they don't go running back is in the draft. If they don't find a running back at all during the draft, and like I said, I'm with you. I don't think that they should bring one in free agency. John, I honestly and truly believe, I'm going to say a name, and you tell me what you think about this. I think they need to give another look at a player that they've had on the practice squad the whole year, and that's Jawar Jordan.
Jawar Jordan.
I think Jawar
and British Books didn't get a good shot last year. I'm sorry.
Yeah. No. You're right. Now, I just wanted that. What do you think about them, using Jawar Jordan just a little bit more? John, I just feel like this young man is a young man who has had to overcome a lot of adversity playing the game of football. And, people look at his size, people look at his stature and don't think that he is, when you at first look, you're saying no, but this guy is a very explosive runner. This guy will do everything that you need for him to do. He can block. He can also catch out of the backfield, John. And he is also one of those shifty runners that it may not be as big as cutbacks like Joe Mixon, but his first explosive is to get through the hole and get out.
Yeah, I like Jawar. Again, he's a guy that you can trust out of the backfield to make a play. And this is something that this offense needs. Very good runner. To your point, extremely explosive. What Jawar needs is a full offseason of opportunities. Because if I'm the Houston Texans, if I'm, from DeMeco to Bobby Slowick to even Danny Barrett, does your guy fit our expectations moving forward? And throughout the year, I think the Houston Texans, up and down with, do we want to have Dare, Cam Akers, Damian Pierce, guys to fill in when there's no Joe Mixon? He never got a shot. British Brooks got a shot.
Yeah.
Tawar never got a shot. And I don't know how much of last year will play into his future of getting a shot or not.
And I think that what the Houston Texans did by bringing him back and signing him to the future active roster, but by bringing him back, I know that they see something in him. I know that he has the talent. I know that he just needs the opportunity. And John, you look at it, there's a lot of times when, watching the NFL, you see like, man, all this guy needed was an opportunity. And so I hope that the Houston Texans and Danny Barrett, says, hey, we got a guy here that could give us some production as well. And they get an opportunity to see what he can do, with more reps.
Thank you guys for watching today's episode of the Locked On Texans podcast. Please be sure to subscribe, like, and comment to the Locked On Texans podcast on YouTube and wherever you listen to your podcast. Also, give me a follow on Twitter at John_Hickman12.
And make sure you follow me on the app formerly known as Twitter at Big Star Sports with the Z at the end. John, they still do this? It's going down. Until
next time, ladies and gentlemen. Peace.